Hi, everybody. Thanks for tuning in. We appreciate it. This is Tim Andersen, the appraiser's advocate, and we are here with the movers and shakers of real estate appraisal today, especially Mr. Craig Morley. Craig, how are you this morning?
Doing very well. How are you today, Tim?
I think I'm going to survive, Craig. Thank you for asking. Now, we have to do this. Craig is a sitting member, and he's told me after some of the meetings he's a snoozing member, but he's a sleeping member. Sleeping, hello. I can't edit that out. I don't know how. He is a sitting member of the Appraisal Standards Board, but Craig is not here today in that capacity. He is here in his capacity as a state certified general real estate appraiser in 3 states and someone who is extremely connected throughout the real estate industry across the United States. So, Craig, with that disclaimer, we're glad you're here this morning. Thank you for your time.
Tim, it's always a pleasure. Thanks for the invitation.
I appreciate it. And we wanted to get this one done because you're about to take an extended vacation and get back just in time to fly into Las Vegas for the Appraisal Summit. Is that correct?
Yes, yeah, we're going to be gone for a couple of weeks, so we thought it might be nice to visit before we headed out, and didn't, we're in a 12-hour different time zone, so.
Well, bon voyage, Craig. In Craig, so much is happening in appraisal world. We can't keep up with it, but we have to try our best to keep up with what we can. So a lot of appraisers are concerned about a list of what you and I have called no-no words or no-no terms. And the GSEs are all excited about this. And they've said things like, well, appraisers are not supposed to describe neighborhoods as desirable. They're not supposed to say that, for example, schools are in close proximity, things like this. Now, across many forums, in many locations, appraisers have chimed in saying this is censorship. And this is a violation of my my Second Amendment free speech rights, and that Fannie has the right to suggest, but Fannie does not have the right to censor. So let's consider this issue, Craig. Now, okay, the Second Amendment says that the government, and Fannie isn't the government, but said the government shall not censor our rights of free speech. But yet, in the same vein, Craig, we both know that you don't walk into a crowded theater and shout fire. So obviously, there are limits on free speech. Now, is Fannie Mae, and when I say that, I mean that generically, are the GSEs trying, in your opinion, are the GSEs trying to limit our free speech? And if so, why? And if not, why?
I don't believe that the GSEs are intentionally trying to limit free speech. We've been at a lot of the conferences, we've talked to representatives from Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and talked to those who are in the position of, trying to put some of these so-called regulations in place. And I think the problem that we have is that oftentimes as we write our appraisal reports, we're not as careful in describing what the GSE, or what the intended users of the appraisals want described. And so what might be convenient for you may be inconvenient for someone else in that generic term. We have situations where appraisers will say, well, this is a crime-ridden neighborhood. Well, relative to what? What does that actually mean? And so I think that the thing that we're trying to get away from is some of these ambiguous terms that sometimes show up in appraisals, and specific terms as far as trying to describe, what's a desirable neighborhood to you? A desirable neighborhood to a young family might be you're across the street or close to an elementary school. And for an empty nester retired person, that may be an undesirable characteristic. Yeah, the last thing I want is 500 10-year-olds going to school across the street or within a block of me and having all the buses and traffic associated with that. And so what I think we're trying to do, at least I think what the GSEs are trying to do, is have appraisers become more specific in describing the neighborhood and avoid some of these terms that by themselves really don't mean very much. And as we've talked with some of the GSEs, I believe that is a fair representation of what they're trying to get us to do as appraisers.
Craig, let's go back to the use of the word desirable. Now, you mentioned empty nesters probably don't want to be in a neighborhood full of elementary school kids, and it's simply because they've already done that. That part of their life is past, and they want to enjoy the quiet at the end of their lives with people of their own age. Okay, that makes sense. Now, so instead of the appraiser typing, the subject is in a desirable neighborhood, which you and I both agree is sufficiently ambiguous as to be essentially meaningless. What should the appraiser instead tell the client? How does the appraiser, without using the word desirable, tell the client that the subject is indeed in a neighborhood the market wants to buy in?
Well, there's several ways I think that this can be addressed. The first, as we're describing the neighborhood, and Tim, I think part of the problem is that with the current reporting form, you've got 3 or 4 lines to try to describe a neighborhood. It's wholly insufficient to provide any kind of meaningful description. And I know you and I have both reviewed a lot of appraisals. I don't really love the little see the addendum for everything, see the addendum for the neighborhood, see the addendum for the site, see the addendum for this, and then you get these things randomly scattered through some various addendum, hard to find in the report. So for me personally, I like to see some kind of a brief, summary of the neighborhood description. And then if you've got to go into more detail, go into the more details in an addendum to be more precisely describe it. But I think the factual information on the elements that either make the neighborhood desirable or not desirable, or it may just simply be, and I think most of the time appraisers are describing the neighborhood as this is a neutral neighborhood, in terms of, it's just kind of typical of the market. But the thing that I try to do is go in and say, this neighborhood includes the following characteristics. You've got shopping located along these streets. It's neighborhood shopping, it's regional shopping. You've got collector streets running through the neighborhood, or you don't. You've got access to the freeways within a mile of the subdivision, or whatever that may be. Whatever elements you think are relevant to the assignment that are going to affect the characteristics that the market's going to respond to, you can describe in factual terms. There's an elementary school 2 blocks away and a public park across the street, and you've got neighborhood shopping 3 blocks away on such and such a street, or whatever elements that you think are something that would be useful for your client to understand. And if we get used to being specific in the description and shy away from the use of terms that really don't mean anything in terms of being specific, I think that would be the direction that would most likely keep us out of trouble. I think part of the problem that we have is that regionally, there are some terms that we use that in other parts of the country are code words or proxies for, that may have a completely different meaning than what the appraiser is trying to convey. But when those words are used, it sets off an alarm, a trigger that says this appraiser is conveying something that could be misconstrued as being racist. And I guarantee you that the GSEs, the lenders that are originating the loans, and the appraiser don't want to have those kinds of misunderstandings, because we've used words that are not clearly describing what we're trying to describe. And that is, I mean, that's the world we live in right now. So we just need to be a little more careful on how we describe things.
I have to take the mute button off here. All right, let's go. Let's look at something specific. Okay, you're in a major metropolitan area, and the Catholic Church has one of the best hospitals in the region in that city, and it's St. Thomas Aquinas Hospital. But as soon as you start talking about St. Thomas Aquinas, you're pretty much narrowing that down to Christianity and then to Catholicism. Now, to say the subject is proximate to St. Thomas Aquinas Hospital, how can that possibly be racist? I mean, that's the name of the hospital. You can't call you could say the subject is proximate to a hospital, but then a hospital could be a 10-bed private facility or a 500-bed a charity facility, such as that type of hospital, or it could be near a major university and affiliated with that university's medical and dental programs. So what in the world is even possibly racist about saying the subject is located 1.5 miles away from St. Thomas Aquinas Hospital, which is also a major employer in the area? What can the GSEs, what can our political foes possibly see racist in something as bland as a statement like that?
It's a really good question. And in that scenario, obviously the reference to some kind of a religious affiliation raises some red flags. We run into the same problem when you start referring to neighborhoods that are commonly known as Chinatown or Little Italy or whatever it may be. And some of the fair housing folks have kind of suggested that, well, if it's a given name that is, so my house is located on, Catholic Street. Well, it's the name of the street. The given name isn't in and of itself a code word or a problem. But I think in the case that we've outlined here, I think you can still describe, hey, I'm located 2 blocks from a private hospital that has 500 beds and is a major employer for the neighborhood. And that has provided enough specific information that that it shouldn't be an issue. I think you can do the same thing with a number of these kinds of characteristics that we run into, that you're next to a public regional hospital that is associated with with UNLV or something like that. There's ways to do it that accurately describe the situation without possibly opening yourself up to some of these other issues.
In one of Miami's wealthier, older, prestigious neighborhoods, there is a filed plat, and I'm not going to use the name because the name of the plat to me is offensive. But it was set up around the turn of the 20th century, specifically for those who work domestically for the wealthy people in the neighborhood to live in their own area. And that was that was the reasoning behind it. And the plat contains a word I won't use, but yet that's the recorded plat. And when one property transfers from a seller to a buyer, it's lot 16, block 14, thus and so plat of Coral Gables, recorded in Plat Book 3, page 97, the 13th of March, 1913. That kind of thing. Now, to cite that legal description, is that racist? Is that offensive? Is that wrong? Because that's public record. That's not the appraiser's judgment. That's not the appraiser's conclusion or opinion. That's a fact.
Yeah,
and I think the appraiser to do there.
Yeah, I think citing citing a name, a given name, is fine. You're not going to run into an issue if I've used the factual name of a subdivision plat where the words in them and of themselves may be offensive. I think it would be inappropriate to then try to go in and describe the ethnic makeup of the neighborhood. There's really not a reason to need to do that. We have a lot of case studies where appraisers are going in and trying to explain that, well, I got a bunch of this group of people moving out and a bunch of this new group of people moving in. Who cares? What difference does it make? We're not appraising people, we're appraising the property. And obviously the economic forces that affect that are part of the appraisal, but we're measuring market reaction to various kinds of situations that are taking place. And we have a number of communities that are trying to develop so-called workforce housing, where they are trying to find housing that will allow the workforce of the community to be able to afford to buy and live there. And I don't care what the ethnicity of the workforce is. It's just a way to try to go in and provide affordable housing. One of the things that's a little frustrating is that we have had terrible racist policies of the past. And it's interesting that right now HUD is one of these that are trying to solve, so-called trying to solve the problem. And yet HUD was one of the major participants in the racial segregation movements prior to 1964. So there's no question that policies of the past perpetuated discrimination and segregation, and there's no way to get away from that. But at the same time, we need affordable housing in this country. And the fact that in the early 1900s, many of the communities that catered to various ethnicities were located in areas that were near railroad tracks or riverfronts or docks or whatever it may be, is just the reality of what it was. That the issue today is well, that's fine. You would expect homes in areas next to industrial parks or some other place to be less expensive, and therefore it opens the door for affordable housing for somebody. We don't care what the ethnicity is. As appraisers, we measure how the market's responding to it and stay away from describing the ethnicity or the religious backgrounds or any of these other things that are associated. And you may find groups of people who prefer to live in a particular area simply because they have socioeconomic characteristics in common with each other and they feel comfortable. That's fine. You don't need to go into the description of them.
Craig, not too long ago, another appraiser called me and asked me to review one of his appraisals that was going to court. This was a restaurant. It had nothing to do with residential. The GSEs were not involved in it. This was the appraiser was acting as an expert witness. So the appraiser sent me the report, and it was about the restaurant was in the Orlando area. And the appraiser had gone to great lengths to put a lot of census data in the appraisal report itself. And one of the things that he noted was that in Orange County at large, not necessarily Orlando itself, but in Orange County at large, 3.2% of the population was Asian. So I said to him, "Why is that there?" He said, "Well, that's a fact. That's census data. I didn't make that up. I didn't do the polling. That's just census data. What's the problem?" I said, "Well, you're trying to say that this restaurant ought to lease for about $36 a square foot, triple net." Yeah. Well, what does the fact that 3.2% of the population in Orange County is Asian have to do with $36 per square foot triple net for this restaurant? And he was taken aback. He said, "Well, I'd never looked at it that way. I'm just putting in facts. So my client is aware of what I based my final value opinion on." I said, "Well, yeah, but how does 3.2% of the population being Asian connect to $36 a square foot?" And then he couldn't answer the question. He said, "What should I do?" I'd take it out, but at that point I sent an invoice and he paid me, and I don't know what happened, and he never followed up on the court case. But Craig, aren't the GSEs getting carried away with this political correctness silliness? Because let's face it, why can't I quote valuable authoritative sources such as the United States Census Bureau? What could that possibly do to indicate a racism or bias or somehow preferential treatment or disparate treatment? I just don't understand it. Help me out.
Well, I think the thing that we need, your question to the appraiser doing the commercial assignment is the correct question. Why is this a factor that's relevant to the value of a home? How is this relevant to the assignment? What is the characteristic of your census data that you're relying on in developing your opinion of value? And in an environment where you have people who have been discriminated against, it becomes pretty sensitive information that in many cases is absolutely irrelevant to what you're trying to do. Now, we've seen a lot of that information that is available on some of these. I go to census data and it has some useful information. It'll tell me the percentage of homeowners and renters and some of that kind of thing. And if I'm doing some kind of feasibility study, I'm trying to determine what some of the demographic information that might affect the demand for a particular type of housing. Yeah, it might be something that is useful, but it seems to be rarely useful in a typical single family residential assignment that's going to be purchased on the secondary markets by the GSEs. So why open yourself up for the headache in getting information that may be misunderstood and isn't really directly relevant to the assignment? And so, and frankly, I think part of the problem is you've got GSEs who are concerned about having allegations filed against them for bias, racial bias, or some of the other forms of illegal bias that exists out there. And to the, when you see what the GSEs see on the assignments that they get, so, as appraisers, we say some really stupid things in appraisals. And I think the idea of trying to steer clear of some of those really stupid things that we say is an effort to try to protect appraisers as well as the institutions that are trying to deal with the financial markets.
Okay, Craig, as we get to the end here, let me posit another question. Let me posit another theory. Okay, everybody knows that the GSEs are getting away from an appraisal form into a more dynamic appraisal reporting format. And the format will be such that when you're typing away instead of getting to a certain number of letters and then the program says, okay, we're shifting over to the addendum, and then it shifts over to the addendum, you're just going to get more space to type, which means you're not going to have to be flipping through this report, which in its black and whiteness is mind numbing. So you're reading about the neighborhood, and yet it still says the subject is in a desirable neighborhood, despite what everybody has told appraisers not to do. Okay, now, here's my question. Is the GSE's emphasis on getting away from a reporting form toward a reporting format a sort of kind of backhanded way of saying, appraisers, you got to write better. You've got to communicate with us. Don't give us the facts, but then tell us what the facts mean, and then tell us what those facts mean relative to the risks we're going to take in making a mortgage loan on this neighborhood or on this house in this neighborhood at this time. Persuade us to make that loan. Don't just give us facts. We can get facts that we can go to Google and get facts. We need interpretation. And then we need you to communicate clearly and unambiguously the results of your analyses. Is that, could that possibly be one of the motivating factors behind this change that the GSEs are bringing about?
Yeah, I think that pretty well encapsulates what the effort is, to get appraisers to be more specific in the assignment, in the characteristics and the elements that are affecting the property that you're appraising. One of the things that I routinely see is that appraisers, in an effort to try to be descriptive and do a good job, that they'll say, well, I've got a home that has an adverse busy street in the so they're defining the neighborhood as adverse, and the reason why it's adverse is because it's next to a busy street. And then they put the comparable sales in and there's no adjustments for it. And so I look at that and think, well, number one, I think as appraisers, we don't have a defined difference between what is property specific and what is neighborhood specific. Oftentimes we'll see appraisers say, well, this is a beneficial golf course neighborhood, and it's got a beneficial golf course view. The lot backs onto the golf course. Well, the question is does the neighborhood, does the value of property in this golf course neighborhood, is it higher than homes, a block or two away that don't have the influence of the golf course? How can it be a beneficial golf course neighborhood if the homes in this non-golf course community that don't back onto the golf course are selling for the same price, everything else being equal? Is it a beneficial golf course neighborhood characteristic or not? And in some cases, we see, double adjustments. Well, I'm adjusting a positive adjustment for the golf, beneficial golf course neighborhood. At the same time, I'm making a beneficial golf course view adjustment. And now have I double adjusted for a characteristic that may or may not be appropriate. And so if I have a home that backs onto a busy street, is that a neighborhood characteristic or is it a site specific characteristic? And how do I, and if I'm not making an adjustment, is it adverse or not? So my thinking is that as appraisers, we need to sometimes sit down and do a better job of making sure that my narrative in the neighborhood description is consistent, and in a site description, which I think oftentimes are woefully inadequate. We don't describe the characteristics of the neighborhood or the site that we are then putting in our rating system on the grid. And then if we make an adjustment, we haven't done a very good job of explaining how we have supported that adjustment. And so I think as appraisers, the thing that we are needing to do is connect the logical dots from the descriptions in the neighborhood and the site and the building improvements to the analysis that we're providing on the grid, and trying to make sure all of that stuff is connected, it's relevant, and supported. And so, oftentimes I find that if I'm backing a busy street and I've got sound walls and I've got landscaping, and I do a little analysis and I look and say, well, gee, the house across the street that's not backing this busy street is selling for the same price as the one. It's probably not an adverse characteristic, because the market is responding in such a way that it's not penalizing this lot. You'll sometimes find that what you personally may find adverse isn't adverse to the general market. I don't personally love these split entry homes, but if and we don't see a lot of them being built and so forth, but if we don't have market data that is evidence that the market is adversely reacting to it, or that design is less they pay less for a split entry than a traditional rambler, then or two-story, then we probably shouldn't be allowing our personal preferences to influence the adjustments we're making, and we just need to deal with how the market's responding to these things. And I think that across the board, that's been what we're trying to, what I think the GSEs are trying to get us to do is, let's pull our personal opinions out of it. Let's look at the data and be factually and specific in trying to describe this stuff, and show me the evidence of how the market's responding to this stuff.
In other words, you're saying that an appraiser should support an adjustment?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things that this is kind of a frustration to me, is that I don't know that the GSEs have done a good job of explaining what level of support do we need. I hear a lot of appraisers say, "Oh, I've got to prove the adjustment." Well, good luck with that. Support is looking at data and drawing out market reactions, but there's a difference between proving an adjustment and supporting it. That the biggest problem that I see is appraisers don't do anything in describing how the adjustment was developed. Somebody else may take the same set of data and develop a different adjustment, and that's fine. But they both supported it. One may have better support than the other, but I think what they're wanting us to do is to explain to us why you made the adjustment and where the number came from. And if you're doing that, you're miles ahead of what is typically happening on a lot of these appraisals.
Craig, my friend, again, thank you. I appreciate your time this morning. I appreciate your candor and your insight. And I hope that you have a wonderful trip. And while my broken left arm is going to keep me from seeing you in Las Vegas in September, I hope you enjoy that too. And are you participating? Are you speaking or presenting?
Jeff is going to be doing some participations. My son Jeff's going to be doing some stuff there, but I won't be. But we'll send you a picture riding elephants or something like that. And
okay, good deal. All right, Craig. Thanks so much, and again, bon voyage. My best.
All right, thanks very much.